for the dribble about eternity. So much time has been allotted to the universe that the date of its end should already have come, just as it is impossible in a single segment of time to imagine whole an egg lying on a road along which an army is endlessly marching. How stupid our mistaken feeling of time as a kind of growth is a consequence of our finiteness, which, being always on the level of the present, implies its constant rise between the watery abyss in the past and the aerial abyss of the future. Existence is thus an eternal transformation of the future into the past, an essentially phantom process, a mere reflection of the material metamorphoses taking place within us. In these circumstances, the attempt to comprehend the world is reduced to an attempt to comprehend that which we ourselves are deliberately made incomprehensible. The absurdity at which searching thought arrives is only a natural, generic sign of its belonging to a man, and striving to obtain an answer is the same as demanding of chicken broth that it begun to cluck. The theory I found most tempting, that there is no time, that everything is the present, situated like a radiance outside our blindness, it's just as hopeless, as finite hypothesis as all the others. You will understand when you are big. Those are really the wisest words I know. If one adds to this that nature was seeing double when she created us, oh, this accursed pairing which is impossible to escape, horse, cow, cat, dog, rat, mouse, flea, bug, the symmetry of the structure of live bodies is a consequence of the rotation of the worlds. A top that spins for sufficiently long will begin, perhaps, to live, grow, and multiply, and that in our straining toward asymmetry, toward inequality, I can detect a howl for genuine freedom, an urge to break out of the circle. Ehrlich wetter in Zeiten steht es aber, dass im Morgen bestimmt regnen wird, said finally the young German, who was sitting beside Fedor on the bench, and who had seemed to him to resemble Konchiev. Imagination again, but what a pity. I had even thought up a dead mother for him to trap truth. But what can a conversation with him never blossom out into reality, break through to realization? Or is this a realization, and nothing better is needed, since a real conversation would only be disillusioning, with the stumps of stuttering, the chaff of hemming and hawing, the debris of small worlds. Da kommen die Wolkenstone, continued Konchievoid German, pointing his finger at the full-breasted cloud rising in the west. A student must probably, perhaps with a philosophical or musical vein. Where is Yasha's friend now? He would hardly be likely to come here. Halb fünf ungefähr, he added in response to Fedor's question, and gathering his cane he left the bench. His dark, stooping figure receded along the shady footpath. Perhaps a poet? After all, there must be poets in Germany, puny ones, local ones, but all the same not butchers, only a garnish for the meat. He was too lazy to swim back to the other side. He followed leisurely the trail that skirted the lake along its northern edge. At the spot where a wide sandy declivity reached the water, like the uncovered roots of apprehensive pines supporting the sliding bank, there were some more people, and drowned below the strip of glass lay 3 naked corpses, white, pink, and brown, like a triple sample of the sun's action. Further on, along the bend of the lake, there was a marshy stretch, and the dark, almost black soil the path stuck refreshingly to his bare heels. He went upwards again over this needle-scattered slope, and walked through the speckled forest toward his lair. All was cheerful, sad, sunny, shady. He did not feel like returning home, but it was time. For a moment he lay down by an old tree that had seemed to have beckoned him. "Show you something interesting." A little song sounded among the trees, and presently there came into view, walking at a brisk pace, 5 nuns, round-faced, wearing black dresses and white coifs, and a little song, half schoolgirlish, half angelic, hovered about them the whole time, while the first one and then another bent down on the move to pluck a modest flower, invisible to Fedor, although he was lying close by, and then straightened up very nimbly, simultaneously drawing level with the others, taking up the rhythm and adding to this ghost flower to a ghostly nosegay, with an idyllic gesture, the thumb and index touching for an instant, the other fingers delicately curved, and it all looked so much like a staged scene, and how much skill there was in everything, and what an infinity of grace and art, where the director lurked behind the pines. How well everything was calculated, there walking slightly out of order, and then leveling out again, 3 in front and 2 behind, and the fact that one of the girls behind giggled briefly, a very cloistral sense of humor, because suddenly one of those in front had the touch of expansiveness, almost splashed her hands over a particularly heavenly note, and the way the song dwindled as it receded, while his shoulder continued to stoop, and fingers sought a stalk of grass, but the latter, merely swaying, remained to gleam in the sun, where had it happened before. What had straightened up and started to sway, And now they all departed through the trees, on quick feet and buttoned shoes, and some half-naked little boy, pretending to seek a ball in the grass, rudely and automatically repeated a snatch of their song in what musicians call a clowning refrain. How it had been mounted! How much labor had gone into this light, swift scene, into this deft traverse! What muscles there were beneath that heavy-looking black cloth which would be exchanged after the intermission for gossamer ballet skirts! A cloud blocked the sun, the light from the forest drifted and gradually faded. Fedor walked to the clearing where he had left his clothes. In the hole beneath a bush which always sheltered them so obligingly, he now found only a single sneaker. His rug, his shirt, and his trousers had vanished. There was a story to the effect that a passenger who inadvertently dropped his glove out of a train window promptly threw out its mate, so that at least the person who found them should have a pair. In this case, the thief had acted the other way. The old, badly worn sneakers were probably no good to him, but in order to make fun of his victim, he had separated the pair. Furthermore, a scrap of newspaper had been left in the sneaker with a penciled inscription, Vielen Dank. Fedor wandered all around, finding no one and nothing. The shirt was frayed, and he did not mind losing it, but there was something what grieved about the plaid laprobe, brought all the way from Russia, and the good flannel pants quite recently bought. Together with the trousers had gone 20 marks, obtained 2 days before for at least a partial payment of his room. Also gone were a small pencil, a handkerchief, a bunch of keys. The latter somehow was worst of all. If nobody happened to be at home, which might easily be the case, it would be impossible to get into the apartment. The edge of a cloud dazzlingly caught fire, and the sun slipped out. It emitted such hot, blissful strength that, forgetting his vexation, Fedor lay down on the moss and began to watch the next snowy colossus draw near. Eating up the blue as it advanced, the sun slid into it smoothly, its rim of funeral fire quivering and splitting as it glided through the white cumulus, and then finding a way out. It first threw out 3 rays and then expanded, filling the eyes with spotted fire, blackballing them, so that no matter where you looked, domino patterns glided past, and as the light got stronger or died away, all the shadows in the forest breathed and did push-ups. A small incidental relief was supplied by the fact that, thanks to the Shigolovs going away the following day to Denmark, there would be an extra set of keys, which meant he could keep quiet about the loss of his bunch. Going away, going away, going away. He imagined what he had constantly been imagining during the past 2 months, the beginning, tomorrow night, of his full life with Zina, the release, the slaking, and meanwhile a sun-charged cloud, filling up, growing with swollen turquoise veins, with a fiery itch in its thunder root, rose in all its turgid, unwieldy magnificence, and embraced him, the sky and the forest, and to resolve this tension seemed a monstrous joy incapable of being borne by man. A ripple of wind ran over his chest, his excitement slowly subsided, the air grew dark and sultry. It was necessary to hurry home. Once more he searched under the bushes, then shrugged his shoulders, pulled the elastic belt of his trunks together, and set out on his way back. When he left the forest and started to cross the street, the tarry sickiness of the asphalt under his bare foot was proved to be a pleasant novelty. It was also interesting to walk on the sidewalk. Dream-lightness, an elderly passer-by in the black felt hat stopped, looked back after him, and made a coarse remark, but immediately, by way of happy compensation, a blind man sitting with a concertina against a stone wall mumbled a small request for alms, and squeezed out a polygon of music, as if there were nothing out of the way. It was odd, though. Surely you must have heard that I was barefoot. 2 schoolboys shouted at the naked passer-by as they rode past clinging to the back of the tram, and then the sparrows returned to the turf between the rails, whence they had been frightened by the clattering yellow car. Drops of rain had begun to fall, and it was as if someone were applying a silver coin to different parts of his body. A young policeman detached himself from a newspaper stand and came over to him. "It's forbidden to walk about the city like that," he said, looking at Fedor and the navel. "Everything's been stolen," explained Fedor briefly. "That mustn't happen," said the policeman. "Yes, but it happened all the same," said Fedor, nodding. Several people had already stopped by them and were following the dialogue with curiosity. "Whether you've been robbed or not, you can't go about the streets naked," said the policeman, growing angry. "Quite, but I have to get somewhere to the taxi stand, see? You can't in that state. Unfortunately, I am unable to turn into smoke or grow a suit. And I'm telling you, you can't walk about like that," said the policeman. "Unheard of shamelessness," commented someone's thick voice from the back. "In that case," said Fedor, "it remains for you to fetch me a taxi while I stand here." "Standing in the nude is also impossible," said the policeman. "I'll take off my trunks and imitate a statue," suggested Fedor. The policeman took out his notebook and so fiercely tore the pencil out of the pencil hold that he dropped it on the sidewalk. Some workmen or others servilely picked it up. "Name and address," said the policeman, boiling. "Count Fedor Goodunov Sherdintsev," said Fedor. Stop being funny and tell me your name, roared the policeman. Another one came up with a higher rank and inquired what the matter was. My clothes were stolen in the forest, said Fedor patiently, and suddenly felt that he was completely wet with the rain. One or two standers-by had run beneath the shelter of an awning, and an old woman standing by his elbow put up her umbrella, nearly gouging her eye out. Who stole them? Asked the sergeant. I don't know, and what's more, I don't care, said Fedor. Right now I want to go home, and you are detaining me. The rain suddenly grew heavier and swept across the asphalt. The whole of its surface seemed to be covered with jumping little candles. The policemen, all matted and blackened by the damp, probably considered the cloudburst to be an element in which bathing trunks were, if not appropriate, then at least permissible. The younger one tried to obtain Fedor's address, but his senior waved his hand, and the two of them, slightly quickening their sedate pace, retreated under the awning of the grocer's shop. The glistening Fedor Konstantinovitch ran through the noisy splashing of the rain, turned a corner, and shot into an automobile. Arriving home and telling the driver to wait, he pressed the button which, until 8 p.m., automatically opened the front door and hurled himself up the stairs. He was let in by Mariana Nikolaevna. The hall was full of people and things. Shigolov in his shirt-sleeves, two fellows struggling with a box in which, it seems, was the radio, a comely milliner with a hat box, a coil of wire, a pile of linen from the laundry. You're crazy, cried Mariana Nikolaevna. For God's sake, pay the taxi, said Fedor, wriggling his cold body through the people and things, and finally, over a barricade of trunks, he crashed his way through to his room. They had supper all together that evening, and later on were to come to the Kazakhstans, the Baltic Baron, another person or two. At table, Fedor gave an embellished account of his honest adventure, and Shigolov laughed heartily, while Mariana Nikolaevna wanted to know, not without reason, how much cash there had been in the pants. Zina only shrugged her shoulders, and with unusual frankness urged Fedor to help himself to the vodka, obviously fearing that he had caught a chill. Well, our last evening, said Boris Ivanovitch, having laughed to his heart's content. May you prosper, senor. Someone told me the other day that you dashed off a pretty nasty paper on Petroshevsky. Very laudable. Listen, Mama, there's another bottle there. No point in taking it with us. Give it to the Kazakhstans. So you're going to remain an orphan, he continued, starting on the Italian salad and devouring it with the utmost sloppiness. I don't think our Zinaida Oskarovna will look after you too well. Eh, princess? Yes, that's how it is, my dear chap. One twist of fate, and the king is mate. I never thought that the fortune would smile on me. Touch wood, touch wood. Why, only last winter I was wondering what to do, tighten my belt or sell Mariana Nikolaevna for scrap. You and I had a year and a half of cohabitation, if you'll excuse the expression, and tomorrow we part, probably forever. Man is fate's plaything, happy today, happy tomorrow. When supper was over and Zina had gone down to let the guests in, Fedor retreated noiselessly to his room, where everything was animated by rain and wind. He half closed the casements of his window, but a moment later the knight said, "No," and with a kind of wide-eyed insistence, disdaining blows, entered again. I was so tickled to learn that Tanya has a little girl, and I am terribly glad for her and for you. The other day I wrote Tanya a long lyrical letter, but I have an uncomfortable feeling that I put the wrong address on it. Instead of 122, I put some other number, without thinking, just as I did once before, and I don't know why this happens. One writes an address heaps of times, automatically and correctly, and then all of a sudden one hesitates, one looks at it consciously, and one sees you're not sure of it. It seems unfamiliar, very queer, you know, like taking a simple word, say ceiling, and seeing it as ceiling or ceiling, until it becomes completely strange and feral, something like Iceling or Ingles. I think that someday that will happen to the whole of life. In any case, I wish Tanya from me everything gay, green, and Lashino summery. Tomorrow my landlord and landlady are going away, and I am beside myself with joy. Beside myself, a very pleasant situation, like on the rooftop at night. I'll stay at Agamemnostrasse another month and then move. I don't know how things will work out. By the way, my Chernyshevsky is selling rather well. Who exactly was it told to you that Bunin praised it? They already seem ancient history to me now, my exertions over the book and all those little storms of thought, those cares of the pen, and now I am completely empty, clean, and ready to receive new lodgers. You know I am black as a gypsy from the Grunwald sun. Something is beginning to take shape, and I think I'll write a classical novel with types, love, fate, conversations. The door suddenly opened. Zina half entered without letting go of the door handle and threw something on his desk. Pay this to Mama, she said. She glanced at him through slitted eyes and disappeared. He unfolded the banknote. 200 marks. The amount seemed colossal, but a moment's calculation showed that it would only just suffice for the past 2 months, 80 plus 80, and 35 for the coming one, for now on without board. But everything grew confused when he began to consider that for the past month he had not been taking lunch, but on the other hand had been receiving bigger suppers. Besides that, he had been contributed during that time 10 or 15 marks, and on the other hand he owed for telephone conversations, and for 1 or 2 other trifles such as today's taxi. The solution to the problem was beyond him. It bored him. He tossed the money beneath the dictionary. And with descriptions of nature, I am very glad that you're reading my thing over again, but now it's time to forget it. It was only an exercise, a tryout, an essay before the school holidays. I have missed you a great deal, and perhaps, I repeat, I don't know how it will work out. I'll visit you in Paris. Generally speaking, I'll abandon tomorrow this country, oppressive as a headache, where everything is alien and repulsive to me. Where a novel about incest, and there's some brash trash, some cloyingly rhetorical, pseudo-brutal tale about war is considered the crown of literature, where in fact there is no literature, and hasn't been for a long time, where sticking out of the fog of a most monotonous democratic dampness, also pseudo, you have the same old jackboot and helmet, where our native enforced social intent in literature has been replaced by social opportunity, and so on and so on. I could go on as much longer. And it is amusing that 50 years ago every Russian thinker with a suitcase used to scribble exactly the same, an accusation so obvious as to have become even banal. Earlier, on the other hand, in the golden middle of the last century, goodness, what transports! Little gemütlich Germany, ach, brick cottages, ach, kiddies go to school, ach, the peasant doesn't beat his horse with a club. Never mind, he has his own German way of torturing it in a cozy nook, with a red-hot iron. Yes, I would have left long ago, but there are certain personal circumstances, not to mention my wonderful solitude in this country, the wonderful beneficent contrast between my inner habitus and the terribly cold world around me. You know, in cold country houses are warmer than in the south, better insulated and heated, but even these personal circumstances are capable of taking such a turn that soon, perhaps, I'll leave the Federland, and bring them with me. And when we will return to Russia, what idiotic sentimentality, what a rapacious groan must our innocent hope convey to people in Russia. But our nostalgia is not historical, only human. But how can one explain to them? It's easier for me, of course, than for another to live outside Russia, because I know for certain that I shall return, first because I took away the keys to her, and secondly because, no matter when, in 100, 200 years, I shall live there in my books, or at least in some researcher's footnote. There now you have a historical hope, a literary historical one. I lust for immortality, even for an earthly shadow. Today I am writing you non-stop nonsense, non-stop trains of thought, because I am well and happy, and besides that, all this has something to do in a roundabout way with Tanya's baby. The literary review you ask about is called The Tower. I don't have it, but I think you'll find it in any Russian bookshop. Nothing came from Uncle Oleg. When did he send it? I think you've mixed something up. Well, that's it. Keep well. Je t'embrasse. Night, rain quietly falling, it has found its nocturnal rhythm. It can now go on for infinity. He heard the hall fill with departing voices, heard somebody's umbrella fall in the elevator summoned by Zina rumble and come to a halt. All was still again. Fedora went into the dining room, and Mariana Nikolaevna was clearing the table, her plump, dark pink face, her glossy wings of her nose, violet eyebrows, apricot hair turning bristly blue on her fat-shaven nape, her azure orb with its mascara folds acanthus, momentarily immersing its gaze in the draggy ooze on the bottom of the teapot. Her rings, her garnet brooch, the flowery shawl on her shoulders, all this together constituted a crudely but richly daubed picture in a somewhat hackneyed genre. She put on her spectacles and took out a sheet with figures on it, which Fedor asked how much he owed her. At this, Shigolev raised his eyebrows in surprise. He had been sure that they would not get another penny from their lodger, and being essentially a kindly man, he had advised his wife only yesterday not to press Fedor, but to write him in a week or two later from Copenhagen, with a threat to approach his relatives. After settling up, Fedor retained 3.5 marks out of the 200 and went off to bed. In the hallway, he met Zina returning from below. "Well," she said, holding her finger on the switch, a half-interrogative, half-urging interjection which meant approximately, "Are you coming this way? I'm putting out the light here, so hurry up." The dimple on her naked arm, pale silk-clad leggings, and velvet slippers lowered face, darkness. He went to bed and began to fall asleep to the whisper of the rain. As always on the border between consciousness and sleep, all sorts of verbal rejects, sparkling and tinkling, broke in. The crystal crunching of that Christian night beneath a chrysolitic star, and his thought, listening for a moment, aspired to gather them and use them, and began to add of its own, extinguished Yasnya Polyana's light, and Pushkin dead, and Russia far, but since there is no good, the stipple of rhymes extended further. A falling star, a cruising chrysolite, an aviator's avatar. His mind sank lower and lower into a hell of alligator alliterations, into infernal cooperatives of words. Through their nonsensical accumulation, a round button of these pillowcase prodded him in the cheek. He turned on his other side, and against a dark backdrop, naked people ran into the Grunwald lake. A monogram of light resembling an Vesuvian glided diagonally to the highest corner of his subpalpebral field of vision, behind a certain closed door in his brain. Holding on to its handle but turning away from it, his mind commenced to discuss with somebody a complicated and important secret. But when the door opened for a minute, it turned out that they were talking about chairs, tables, stables. Suddenly, in the thickening mist, the Reason's last toll gate, came the silver vibration of a telephone bell, and Fedor rolled over prone, falling. The vibration stayed in his fingers as if a nettle had stung him, and the hall, having already put back the receiver into its black box, Studsina, she seemed frightened. "That was for you," she said in a low voice. "Your former landlady, Frau Boy. She wants you to come over immediately. There's somebody waiting for you at her place. Hurry." He pulled on a pair of flannel trousers and, gasping for breath, went along the street. At this time of year in Berlin there is something similar to the St. Petersburg White Nights. The air was transparently gray, the houses swam past like a soapy mirage. Some night workers had wrecked the pavement at the corner, and one had to creep through narrow passages between planks. Everyone being given at the entrance a small lamp, which at the exit was to be left on a hook screwed into a post or out simply on the sidewalk next to some empty milk bottles. Leaving his bottle as well, he ran further through the lustrous streets, and the premonition of something incredible, of some impossible superhuman surprise, splashed his heart with a snowy mixture of happiness and horror. In the gray murk, blind children wearing dark spectacles came out of a school building in pairs and walked past him. They studied at night in economically dark schools which, in the daytime, housed seeing children. And the clergyman accompanying them resembled the Lishino village schoolmaster, Mishkov. Leaning against a lamp-post and hanging his tousled head, the scissor-like legs of a striped pantaloon displayed wide, and his hands stuffed in his pockets, a lean drunkard stood as if just come from the pages of an old Russian satirical rag. There was still light in the Russian bookstore. They were serving books to the night taxi-cab drivers, and through the yellow opacity of the glass he noticed the silhouette of Misha Berezovsky, who was handing out Petrier's black atlas to someone. Must be hard to work nights. Excitement lashed him again as soon as he reached his former haunts. He was out of breath from running, and his rolled-up lap robe weighed heavily on his arm. He had to hurry, but he could not recall the layout of the streets, and the ashy night confused everything, changing as in a negative image the relationship between dark and light parts. And there was no one to ask. Everybody was asleep. Suddenly a poplar loomed, and behind it a tall church with a violet-red window divided into harlequin rhombuses of colored light. Inside, a night service was in progress, and an old lady in mourning, with a cotton wool under her bridge and her spectacles, hastened to mount the steps. He found his street, but at the end of it a post with a gauntleted hand on it indicated that one had to enter from the other end where the post office was. Since at the end a pile of flags had been prepared for tomorrow's festivities, he was afraid of losing it on the course of a detour, and moreover the post office that would come afterwards if Mother had not already been sent a telegram. He scrambled over boards, boxes, and a toy grenadier in curls, and caught sight of the familiar house, and there the workmen had already stretched a red strip of carpet across the sidewalk from door to curb, as it used to be done in front of their house on the Neva embankment on ball nights. He ran up the stairs, and Frau Boy immediately let him in. Her cheeks glowed, and she wore a white hospital overall. She had formerly practiced medicine. "Only don't get all worked up," she said. "Go to your room, and wait there. You must be prepared for anything," she added, with a vibrant note in her voice, and pushed him into the room, which he had thought he would never in his life enter again. He grasped her by the elbow, losing control over himself, but she shook him off. "Somebody has come to see you," said Staboy. "He's resting." Wait a couple of minutes. The door banged shut. The room was exactly as if he had been still living in it. The same swans and lilies on the wallpaper, the same painted ceiling wonderfully ornamented with the Tibetian butterflies. There, for example, was Thecla Beati. Expectancy, all, the frost of happiness, the surge of sobs merged into a single blinding agitation as he stood in the middle of the room, incapable of movement, listening and looking at the door. He knew who would enter in the moment, and was amazed now that he doubted his return. Doubt now seemed to him to be this obtuse obstinacy of one half-witted, the distrust of a barbarian, the self-satisfaction of ignoramus. His heart was bursting like that of a man before execution, but at the same time this execution was such a joy that life faded before it, and he was unable to understand the disgust that he had been wont to experience when in hastily constructed dreams he had evoked what was now taking place in real life. Suddenly the door shuddered. Another remote one had opened somewhere beyond it, and he had heard with a familiar tread an indoor Morocco-padded step. Noiselessly, but with terrible force, the door flew open, and on the threshold stood his father. He was wearing a gold-embroidered skull-cap and a black chamois jacket, with breast pockets for cigarette case and magnifying glass. His brown cheeks, with their 2 sharp furrows running down from both sides of his nose, were particularly smoothly shaven. Hoary hairs gleamed in his dark beard like salt, and warmly, shaggily, his eyes laughed out of a network of wrinkles. But Fedor stood and was unable to take a step. His father said something, but so quietly that it was impossible to make anything out, although one somehow knew it to be connected with his return, unharmed, whole, human, and real. And even so, it was terrible to come closer, so terrible that Fedor felt he would die if the one who had entered should move toward him. Somewhere in the rear rooms sounded the warningly rapturous laughter of his mother, while his father made soft chuckling sounds, hardly parting his lips, as if he used to do when he taking a decision or seeking something on the page of a book. Then he spoke again, and this again meant that everything was all right and simple, that this was the true resurrection, that it could not be otherwise, and also that he was pleased with his captures, his return, his son's book about him, and that at last everything grew easy. A light broke through, and his father with confident joy spread out his arms. With a moan and a sob, Fedor stepped toward him, and in the collective sensation of woolen jacket, big hands with the tender prickle of trimmed mustaches, there swelled an ecstatically happy, living, enormous, paradisal warmth in which his icy heart melted and dissolved. At first the supposition of the thingamy of the thingababov, and the pale palpitating stripe that went upwards were utterly incomprehensible, like words of a forgotten language or the parts of a dismantled engine, and the senseless tangle sent a shiver of panic running through him. I have woken up in a grave, on the moon, in the dungeon of dingy non-being, but something in his brain tuned. His thoughts settled and hastened to paint over the truth, until he realized that he was looking at the curtain of a half-opened window, at a table in front of a window, such is the treaty with reason, the theater of earthly habit, the library of temporary substance. He lowered his head onto the pillow and tried to overtake a fugitive sense, warm, wonderful, all-explaining, but the new dream he dreamt was an uninspired compilation, stitched together out of the remnants of daytime life and fitted to it. The morning was overcast and cool, with gray-black puddles in the yard's asphalt, and one could hear the nasty flat thumping of carpets being beaten. The Shigolevs had finished their packing, Zina had gone off to work, and at 1 o'clock was due to meet her mother for lunch at the Brotherland. Luckily, they had not suggested that Fedor join them. On the contrary, Mariana Yakovlevna, as she warmed up some coffee for him in the kitchen where he sat in the dressing-gown, undisconcerted by the bivouac-like atmosphere of the apartment, warned him that a little Italian salad and some ham had been left at the larder for lunch. It turned out incidentally that the luckless person who was getting their number by mistake had rung up the previous night. This time he had been tremendously agitated. Something had happened, something which remained unknown. For the 10th time Boris Ivanovich transferred from one valise to another pair of shoes on shoe trees. All clean and shiny, he was unusually meticulous over footwear. Then they dressed and went out, while Fedor shaved, carried out long and successful ablutions, and cut his toenails. It was especially pleasant to get under a tight corner and clip. The pairings shot all over the bathroom. The janitor knocked out, but was unable to enter that, because the Shigolevs had locked the hall door on the American lock, and Fedor's keys gone forever. Through the letterbox, clacking the shutter, the mailman threw the Belgrade newspaper for Tsar and Church, to which Boris Ivanovich subscribed, and later someone thrust in, leaving it to stick out boat-like, a leaflet advertising a new hairdresser's. At exactly 11:30 there came a loud barking from the stairs, and the agitated descent of the Alsatian, which was taken for a walk at the time. With a comb in his hand, he went out to the balcony to see if the weather was clearing up, but although it did not rain, the sky remained hopelessly and wanly white, and one could not believe that yesterday it had been possible to lie in the forest. The Shigolev's bedroom was cluttered up with paper rubbish, and one of the suitcases was open. At its top, a pear-shaped object of rubber was lying in a wafer towel. An itinerant mustache came into the yard with the cymbals, a drum, a saxophone, completely hung with metallic music, with bright music on his head, and with a monkey in a red jersey, sang for a long time, tapping his foot and jingling, without managing, however, to drown out the volleying at the carpets of their trestles. Cautiously pushing the door, Fedor visited Zina's room, where he had never been before, and with the bizarre sensation of a glad moving in, he looked for a long time at the briskly ticking alarm clock, at the rose in a glass with its stem all studded with bubbles, at the divan that had become a bed at night, and at the stockings drying on the radiator. He had a bite to eat, sat down at his desk, dipped his pen and froze over a blank sheet. The Shigolovs returned. The janitor came. Mariana Naklaveda broke a bottle of scent, and he still sat over the glowing sheet, and only came to himself. The Shigolovs were getting ready to go to the station. There were still 2 hours until the train's departure, but then the station was a long way off. I must confess, I like to get there on the cock, said Boris Ivanovich buoyantly as he took hold of his shirt cuff and sleeve in order to climb into his overcoat. Fedor tried to help him. The other, with a polite exclamation, still only halfway in, shied away and suddenly, on the corner, turned into a horrible hunchback, and then went to say goodbye to Mariana Nikolaevna, who, with an oddly altered expression, as if she were dimming and coaxing a reflection, was in the act of putting on a blue hat with a blue veil before the wardrobe mirror. All at once Fedor felt strangely sorry for her, and at a moment's thought he offered to go to the stand for a taxi. Yes, please, said Mariana Nikolaevna, and rushed ponderously to the sofa for her gloves. There proved to be no cabs at the stand. All had been taken, and he was forced to cross the square and look there. When he finally drove up to the house, the Shigolovs were already standing below, having carried their suitcases down themselves. The heavy luggage had been dispatched the day before. Well, God take care of you, said Mariana Nikolaevna, and kissed him with gutta-percha lips on the forehead. Sorotska, Xindasa Telegrobzotska, said Boris the parodist, waving his hand, and the taxi turned and sped away. Forever, thought Fedor, with relief, and whistling went upstairs. Only here did he realize he was unable to enter the apartment. It was particularly galling to raise the brass postal shutter and look through at the bunch of keys lying stairways on the hallway floor. Mariana Nikolaevna had pushed them back in after locking the door behind her. He went down the stairs much more slowly than he had gone up. Zina, he knew, was planning to go from work to the station, considering that the train would be leaving in about 2 hours, and that the bus ride would take an hour. She and the keys would not be back in less than 3 hours. The streets were windy and gray. He had no one to go to, and he never went alone into the pubs or cafes. He hated them fiercely. In his pocket there were 3.5 marks. He bought some cigarettes, and since the gnawing need to see Zina, now when everything was allowed, was really what was taking away all light and sense from the street, from the sky and the air, he hastened to a corner where the necessary bus stopped. The fact that he was wearing bedroom slippers and an ancient crumpled suit, spotted in front, with trousers and a button short on the fly, baggy knees and a patch on his mother's making on the bottom, did not disturb him in the least. His tan and the open collar of his shirt gave him a certain pleasant immunity. It was some kind of national holiday. 3 kinds of flags were sticking out in the house windows: black, yellow, red, black, white, red, and plain red. Each one meant something, and the funniest of all, this something was able to excite pride or hatred in someone. There were large flags and small flags, on short poles and on long ones, but none of this exhibitionism of civic excitement made the city any more attractive. On the Toenschenstrasse, the bus was held by a gloomy procession. Policemen in black leggings brought up the rear in a slow trot, and among the banners there was one with a Russian inscription containing 2 mistakes: Serb instead of Serb, sickle, and Molt instead of Molot, hammer. Suddenly he imagined the official festivals in Russia, soldiers in long-skirted overcoats, the cult of firm jaws, a gigantic placard with a vociferous cliché, clad in linen jacket and cap, and amidst the thunder of stupidities, the kettle drums of boredom, the slave-pleasing splendors, the little squeak of cheap truth, there it is, eternalized, ever more monstrous in its hardiness, a repetition of the Hodinka coronation festivities with its free candy packages. Look at the size of them, now much bigger than the original ones, and with its superbly organized removal of dead bodies. Oh, let everything pass and be forgotten again in 200 years' time. An ambitious failure will vent his frustration to the simpletons dreaming of a good life, that if there does not come to my kingdom, where everyone keeps to himself and there is no equality and no authorities. But if you don't want it, I don't insist and don't care. The Potsdam Square, always disfigured by city work, oh, those old postcards of it, where everything is so spacious, with the droshky drivers looking so happy, and the trains of tight-belted ladies brushing the dust with the same fat flower girls, the pseudo-Parisian character of Unter den Linden, the narrowness of the commercial streets beyond it, the bridge-barge seagulls, the dead eyes of the old hotels of the 2nd, 3rd, 100th class, a few more minutes of riding, and there was the station. He caught sight of Zina, in a beige georgette dress and a white little hat, running up the steps. She was running with her pink elbows pressed to her sides, holding her handbag under her arm, and when he caught up with her and half embraced her, she turned round with that tender, blurry smile, with that happy sadness in her eyes, which she always greeted him with when they met alone. "Listen," she said in a flurried voice, "I'm late. Let's run." But he replied that he had already said goodbye to them, and would wait for her outside. The low sun settling behind the rooftops seemed to have fallen out the clouds that covered the rest of the sky, but they were now quite soft and aloof, as if painted in melting undulations upon a greenish ceiling. There in that narrow slit the sky was on fire, and opposite a window and some metallic ladders shone like a copper. A porter's long shadow, pushing the shadow of a barrow, sucked in that shadow, but this turning it produced again a sharp angle. "We'll miss you, Zina," said Mariana Nikolaevna from the window of the carriage, "but in any case take your vacation in August and come over. We'll see if you can't perhaps stay for good." "I don't think so," said Zina. "Ah, yes, I gave you my keys today. Don't take them with you, please. I left them in the hall, and Boris's are in the desk. Never mind, good enough, I'll let you in," added Mariana Nikolaevna pleasingly. "Well, well, good luck to it," said Boris Ivanovich from behind his wife's plump shoulder, and rolled his eyes. "Ah, Zinka, Zinka, just you come over here and shall ride a bicycle and swill milk. That's the life." The train gave a shudder and started to move. Mariana Nikolaevna kept waiting for a long time. Shigalov drew in his head like a tortoise, and having sat down, probably emitted a Russian grunt. She skipped down the steps, her bag now hung from her fingers, and the last rays of the sun caused a bronze gleam to dance in her eyes as she flew up to Fedor. They kissed as ardently as if she had just arrived from far off, after a long separation. "And now let's go and have some supper," she said, taking his arm. "You must be starved." He nodded. Now to explain it. Why this strange embarrassment, instead of the exultant, voluble freedom I had been so eagerly looking forward to? It was as if I had grown disused from her, or else was unable to adjust myself and her, the former her, to this freedom. "What's the matter with you? You seem out of sorts," she asked observantly after a silence. They were walking toward the bus stop. "It's sad to part with Boris the Brisk," he replied, trying to see if a joke would resolve his emotional constraint. "And I think it's yesterday's escapade," said Zina, smiling, and he detected in her tone of voice a high-strung ring, which in its own way corresponded to his own confusion, and thus both stressed and augmented it. "Nonsense, the rain was warm. I feel wonderful." The bus rolled up. They boarded it. Fedor paid for 2 tickets from his palm. Zina said, "I get my wages only tomorrow, so that all I have now is 2 marks. How much do you have?" "Very little. Out of your 200 I was left only 350, and more than half of what I have blowed." "We have enough for supper, though," said Zina. "Are you quite sure you like the idea of a restaurant? Because I don't too much." "Never mind, resign yourself. In general, now it's all over with healthy home cooking. I can't even make an omelette. We must think about how to manage things, but for now I know an excellent place." Several minutes of silence. The street lamps and shop windows were beginning to light up. The streets had grown pinched and gray from that immature light, but the sky was radiant and wide, and the sunset cloudlets were trimmed with flamingo down. "Look, the photos are ready." He took them from her cold fingers. Zina, standing in the street before her office, with legs placed tightly together in the shadow of a lime trunk, crossing the sidewalk like a boom lowered in front of her. Zina sitting sideways in a windowsill, with a crown of sunshine around her head. Zina at work, badly taken, dark-faced, but to compensate this, her regal typewriter enthroned in foreground, with a gleam of its carriage lever. She thrust them back into her bag, took out and put back her monthly tram ticket with the cellophane holder, took out a small mirror, looked into it, bearing the filling in her front tooth, replaced the mirror inside, clicked the bag shut, lowered it onto her knees, looked at the shoulder, brushed it off a bit of fluff, put on her gloves, turned her head to the window, doing all this in rapid succession, with her features in motion, her eyes blinking, and a kind of inner biting and sucking into the cheeks. But now she sat motionless, looking away, the sinews of her pale neck stretched tight in her white-gloved hands lying on the glossy leather of her handbag. The defile of the Brandenburg Gate. Beyond the Potsdam Square, just as they were approaching the canal, an elderly lady with prominent cheekbones, where had I seen her, with a goggled-eyed, trembling little dog under her arm, made a dive for the exit, swaying and struggling with phantoms, and Zina looked up at her with a fleeting heavenly glance. "Did you recognize her?" she asked. "That was Lawrence. I think she's mad at me because I never ring her up. Quite a superfluous woman, really." "There's a smut on your cheek," said Fedor. "Careful, don't smear it." Again the handbag handkerchief mirror. "Soon we'll have to get out," she said presently. "What? Nothing, I agree. Let's get out of here where you like." "Here," she said 2 stops later, taking his elbow, sitting again from a jolt, rising finally, and fishing out her bag of zip from water. The lights had already taken shape. The sky was quite faint. A truck went by with a load of young people returning from some civic orgy, waving something or other and shouting something or other. In the middle of a treeless public garden, consisting of a large oblong flower bed rimmed by a footpath, an army of roses was in bloom. The small, open enclosure of a restaurant, 6 little tables opposite the garden, was separated from the sidewalk by a whitewashed barrier, topped with petunias. Beside them, a boar and a sow were feeding, and the waiter's black fingernail dipped in the sauce, and yesterday's a lip with a sore on it had been pressed to the gold border of my beer glass. The mist of some sorrow had enveloped Zina, her cheeks, her narrowed eyes, her throat pit, her fragile clavicle, and this was somehow enhanced by the pale smoke from her cigarette. The scuffing of passers-by seemed to stir up the thickening darkness. Suddenly, in the frank evening sky, very high, "Look," he said, "what a beauty!" A brooch with 3 rubies was gliding over the dark velvet, so high that not even the hum of the engine was audible. She smiled, parting her lips and looking upwards. "Tonight?" he asked, and also looking upwards. Only now had he entered into the order of feelings he used to promise himself, when formerly he imagined how they would slip together out of a thraldom that had gradually asserted itself in the course of their meetings and grown habitual, even though it was based on something artificial, something unworthy, in fact, of the significance in which it acquired. Now it seemed incomprehensible why, on any of those 455 days, she and he had not simply moved out of the Shigolev's apartment to dwell together. But at the same time he knew sub-rationally that this external obstacle was merely a pretext, merely an ostentatious device on the part of fate, which had hastily put up the first barrier to come to hand in order to engage meantime in the important, complicated business that secretly required the very delay in development which had seemed to depend on a natural obstruction. Pondering now fate's methods in this illuminated white little enclosure, in Zina's golden presence, and with the participation of the warm concave darkness immediately behind the carved radiance of the petunias, he finally found a certain thread, a hidden spirit, a chess idea for his as yet hardly planned novel, to which he had glancingly referred yesterday in the letter to his mother. It was as of this that he spoke now, spoke in such a way as if it were really the best and the most normal expression of his happiness, which was also expressed in a more accessible edition by things as the velvetness of the air, 3 emerald lime leaves that had got into the lamplight, the icy cold beer, the lunar volcanoes of mashed potato, vague voices, footfalls, the stars among the ruins of clouds. "Here is what I'd like to do," he said, "something similar to Destiny's work in regard to us. Think how fate started it 3.5 odd years ago. The first attempt to bring us together was crude and heavy. That moving of furniture, for example, I see something extravagant in it. A no-holds-barred something, for it was quite a job moving the Lawrences and all their belongings into the house where I had just rented a room. The idea lacked subtlety. To have us meet through Lawrence's wife. Wishing to speed things up, fate brought in Romanov, who rang me up and invited me to a party at his place, but at this point fate blundered. The medium chosen was wrong. I disliked the man, and a reverse result was achieved. Because of him I began to avoid acquaintance of the Lawrences, so that all this cumbersome construction went to the devil. Fate was left with a furniture van on her hands, and the expenses were not recovered." "Watch out," said Zina. She might take offense at this criticism now, and revenge herself. "Listen further. Fate made a second attempt, simpler this time, but promising better success, because I was in need of money, and should have grasped at the offer of work, helping an unknown Russian girl to translate some documents, but this also failed. First, because the lawyer, Charsky, also turned out to be an unsuitable middleman, and secondly, because I hate working on translations into German, so that it again miscarried. Then finally, after this failure, fate decided to take no chances, to install me directly in the place where you lived. As a go-between, she chose not the first person to come along, but someone I liked who energetically took the matter in hand and did not allow me to dodge it. At the last minute, true, there occurred a hitch that almost ruined everything. In her haste, or from my stinginess, Destiny did not produce you at the time of my visit, or of course, after talking 5 minutes to your stepfather, whom fate had been careless enough to let out of his cage, I decided not to take the unattractive room I had glimpsed over his shoulder. But then at the end of her tether, unable to show me you immediately, fate showed me as last desperate maneuver your bluish ball dress on the chair, and strange to say, I myself don't know why, but the maneuver worked, and I can imagine what a sigh of relief fate must have heaved. Only that wasn't my dress. It was my cousin Resa's. She's very nice, but a perfect fright. I think she left it for me to take something off or sew something on. That it was still more ingenious. What resourcefulness! The most enchanting things in nature and art are based on deception. Look, you see. It began with reckless impetuosity, and ended with the finest of finishing touches. Now isn't that the plot for a remarkable novel? What a theme! But it must be built up, curtained, surrounded by dense life, my life, the professional passions and cares. Yes, but that will result in an autobiography with mass executions of good acquaintances. Well, let's suppose that I so shuffle, twist, mix, rechew and rebelch everything, add such spices of my own and impregnate things so much with myself that nothing remains of the autobiography but dust, the kind of dust, of course, which makes the most orange of skies. And I shan't write it now. I'll be a long time in preparing it, years perhaps. In any case, I'll do something else first. I want to translate something in my own manner from an old French sage. In order to reach a final dictatorship over words because of my Shereshevsky, they are still trying to vote. That's all marvelous, said Zina. I like it all immensely. I think you'll be such a writer as have never been before, and Russia will simply pine for you when she comes to her senses too late. But do you love me? What I am saying is, in fact, a kind of declaration of love, replied Fedor. A kind of is not enough. You know, at times I shall probably be wildly unhappy with you, but on the whole it does not matter. I'm ready to face it. She smiled, opening her eyes wide and raising her eyebrows, and then she leaned slightly backwards in her chair and began to powder her chin and nose. I must tell you, this is magnificent. He has a famous passage which I think I can say by heart if I go right on, so don't interrupt me. It's an approximate translation. There was once a man. He lived as a true Christian. He did much good, sometimes by word, sometimes by deed, and sometimes by silence. He observed the facts. He drank the water of the mountain valleys. That's good, isn't it? He murdered the spirit of contemplation and vigilance. He lived a pure, difficult, wise life, but when he sensed the approach of death, instead of thinking about it, instead of tears of repentance and sorrowful partings, instead of monks and notary in black, he invited guests to a feast, acrobats, actors, poets, a crowd of dancing girls, 3 magicians, jolly Tullenberg students, a traveler from Taprobana. In the midst of melodious verses, masks, and music, he drank a goblet of wine and died, with a carefree smile on his face. Magnificent, isn't it? If I have to die one day, that's exactly how I'd like it to be. Only minus the dancing girls, said Zina. Well, that's only a symbol of gay company. Perhaps now we can go? We have to pay, said Zina. Call him over. After this they were left with 11 fittings, counting the blackened coin, which he had picked up a day or two before from the sidewalk. It would bring luck. As they walked down the street, he felt a quick tremor along his spine, and again that emotional constraint, but now in a different, languorous form. It was a 20-minute slow walk to the house, and the air, the darkness, and the honey scent of the blooming lindens caused a sucking ache at the base of the chest. The scent evanesced, and the stretch from linden to linden being replaced there by a black freshness, and then again, beneath the next canopy, an oppressive and heady cloud would accumulate, and Zina would say, tensing her nostrils, "Ah, smell it!" And again the darkness would be drained of savor, and again would be heavy with honey. Will it really happen tonight? Will it really happen now? The weight and threat of bliss, when I walk with you like this, ever so slowly, and hold you by the shoulder, everything slightly sways. My head hums, and I feel like dragging my feet. My left slipper falls off my heel. We crawl, dawdle, dwindle in mist. Now we are almost all melted. And one day we shall recall all this, the lindens, the shadow on the wall, and a poodle's unclipped claws, tapping over the flagstones of the night, and the star, and here is the square and the dark church with the yellow light of its clock, and here on the corner the house. Goodbye, my book. Like mortal eyes, imagined ones must close some day. Onegin from his knees will rise, but the Creator strolls away, and yet the ear cannot right now part with the music and allow the tale to fade. The chords of fate itself continue to vibrate, and no obstruction for the sage exists where I have put the end. The shadows of my world extend beyond the skyline of the page, but blue as tomorrow's morning haze, nor does this terminate the phrase, the end. About the author. Vladimir Nabokov was born in St. Petersburg on April 23, 1889. His family fled to Germany in 1919 during the Bolshevik Revolution. Nabokov studied French and Russian literature at Trinity College, Cambridge from 1919 to 1923, then lived in Berlin 1923 to 1937 and Paris 1937 to 1940, where he began writing mainly in Russian under the pseudonym Sirin. In 1940, he moved to the United States, where he pursued a brilliant literary career as a poet, novelist, critic, and translator while teaching literature at Stanford, Wellesley, Cornell, and Harvard. The monumental success of his novel Lolita in 1955 enabled him to give up teaching and devote himself fully to his writing. In 1961, he moved to Montreux, Switzerland, where he died in 1977. Recognized as one of the century's master prose stylists in both Russian and English, he translated a number of his original English works, including Lolita, into Russian, and collaborated on an English translation of his original Russian works. Thank you for listening to The Gift by Vladimir Nabokov. That book always reminds me of Glory. The character reminds me so much of the character Martin. Um, and also a little bit of the real life of Sebastian Knight, which is funny because that book was right after this one. Although I do not know at what point, if I do read that book, at what point it would be that I would read that book aloud, because I only read it once, that one. Anyway, there is an odd thing there, I feel like, throughout the book, and I feel like, there's a weird form of jealousy, or maybe not jealousy, but a kind of envy he has, or seems to have, toward the other, toward Chernyshevsky, but also a weird form, it seems like, of, it's like, at first, it seems like he really has this naive sort of, almost dislike for Madame Chernyshevsky and her husband, and he just, it's like he pities them or something. He doesn't really seem to like them that much, but I feel like as time goes on, he does, like, especially after he writes that book, which is really bashing Chernyshevsky in a really weird way. You see, he does appear to have some remorse for having written a book that's really more of a, making fun of them in a way, and the expectations that they had of him, like him letting them down so much like that to fully make fun of Chernyshevsky. And then when they were all for his idea, I think taking him really seriously, and then also there's this weird thing there where it seems like, again, there's that envy, like he's so prideful that he's like, he was not good at poetry, he wasn't a good poet, and then he's just like mocking all these things, and then it's like, there's this odd thing there where it's like, he likes to point out that the guy, didn't know his flowers and his plants and his, like, you know, natural life, and I feel almost like it's sort of like meant in an almost mirror opposite of the way it is when he was wanting to write his father's biography. It was like, with his father, he had so much reverence for his father that he almost slipped into, it sounded like, he was imagining himself there with his father, even though it sounded like he never actually was from certain parts. It's like, wait a second. Did he imagine that he was there with his father? Did he just read his father's diaries and, like, stuff, and he's like mentally planning himself there, like he went with them? But maybe he didn't, or something? Or did he really go with them at some point? And that part's kind of weirdly, it seems almost like he must have fantasized it, that he was with them. But there's such an intense adoration for his father, that he's raised his father to this almost like mythical place, and it seems almost like out of reverence for his father and his father's extreme ties to nature, that he's almost like, with this biography of Chernyshevsky, not only like is he pulling apart this person, who he was, but also pulling apart, like his kind of making a stake for, this is everything that I think of this revered man as opposed to my father, who my father by comparison, it's like you almost hear this, my father by comparison, ... but he never actually says it, but you get that sense without him actually having to say it. And there's this also thing there where it's like he's also trying to make a point that this almost snotty child like point that he's like, I'm nothing like the son that you lost. I have my own father, and my father, he's like, he's grieving the loss of his father. They're grieving the loss of their son, but he's grieving his father. And in his grief, it's like he can't stand to be around their grief. Like, it does some sort of weird thing to him where it's like him seeing their grief is just too much. And it seems to make him uncomfortable and shy away from them. And then towards the end, there does seem to be some remorse for that and regret there. Although it's sad because it's way too late for him to do anything to repair that. A funny detail with the girl, although I do feel really bad for her, because it's like there is a mirroring there where it's like he's describing, while he was in this relationship with her, he's describing the way that Chernyshevsky's romantic life was, and the fear that the girl will be cold towards him when he marries her, but he will love her anyway. And then Xena actually seems to reverse mirror that. Like, she's afraid that if they marry, he will never truly put her first and love her. Like, she really is hoping that he will return her love. And I just feel like there's so much sadness there with the thing of him getting swept away by writing the book to so much distraction that he doesn't even go to the masquerade party that she wanted him to go to so badly. And she waited for him there, and anyway, it's so sad that he's like spending so much time in the midst of that relationship, while it seems like it's taking him away from that relationship, but it's also he focused so much on the relationships that Chernyshevsky had that it's like, it's interesting that that's so important to him, and yet in his own life it doesn't reflect it as much as you would think, or something. It's like, or maybe the detail is put in there because he regrets it, because maybe he has some remorse, like thinking back on it, because at the end of the book it does seem like he's describing the very book that you've just read. Like, he's saying, wouldn't it be interesting if I wrote a book like this that sums up my entire literary career up to this point, but also ties together all the little things, little coincidences, and almost meetings of him and her. And at a certain point in the book, there is this thing where it's obvious he is writing to the love of his life, and at the end you see exactly that Xena is the one he's written this for, and he's writing to. So there is some redemption there for his seeming, at times, almost unemotionality. Like, he even has parts where he's, like, ridiculing the emotionality of Chernyshevsky, like, oh, he cried 3 tears. Just that whole thing of poking fun like that, it often speaks to somebody who does feel greatly but can't let themselves feel greatly. Just like he has this fear almost of being tender toward this couple who has lost their son, and in seeing their grief he can't meet their grief. Or like even with his mother, there's this odd tension between them where it's like he can't meet the grief that she's going through with his father. They try, and it almost like they have to come to this place of just understanding this is how the balance is. This is how she feels about it. She's still in this place of denial, and he comes to this place of realizing, you know, anything he says to deny her that denial is it's not going to make anything better. If he says that he doesn't believe her or, you know, anything like that, he's just going to let her have that, which is the most healthy kind of conclusion it can come to. Anyway, it does have some redemptive qualities to it, although towards the beginning I felt like he was much like the character Martin, and not very mature at the beginning. But I feel like it actually does kind of show some emotional maturity at the point when the elder Chernyshevsky passes away. Interesting too how the critiques he has originally, when he imagines having a critical discussion where somebody is having a discussion with him about his works, it's funny, he notices later on that in his mind the discussion was very praising, and in his maturity he's actually come to question himself more, and so the critique becomes a little more scathing, and it's all the faults that he himself owns up to that he has with his writing. One thing I really did not like about this book, but at the same time I felt like it was kind of parodying it in a way, some of the moments with the intense distaste or dislike for the country to which he has now settled. Like anything where he almost seems like to have a disgust for Germany really bothers me. But it almost seems like the idea there is just to paint this picture of somebody who just doesn't realize that there's so much that he says that is German that is really so true of Russians, or there's so much that he thinks is German attitude that's really Russians behaving that way, living in Germany, and he's got it completely wrong. Like the part where he's mentally criticizing this German man, and the moment he realizes that the man is Russian, his attitude completely changes. But it shouldn't have. And it's like, if I mean, you know what I'm saying. It's like just the intense, harsh scrutinizing of people around him. That I didn't really like about the character, but you do see some maturing as the story goes on, and it's still a memorable book. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments.